Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another month's nonprofit finance series. We are delighted to welcome back Donald Wells. Donald has been in the accounting field for 30 years, and in January 2015, he opened his own firm, Wells CPA LLC. He's worked extensively in the field and has a specific passion area in the nonprofit sector. So thank you for being here today for that. He served on several boards, including the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, SocialVentures, Catalyst Columbus, and National Christian Foundation of Ohio. And personally, Donald enjoys working with business leaders and coaching youth in the area. Before I turn it over to Donald this morning, I want to take a moment to give you a few housekeeping tips. In this forum today, we use the chat box specifically for technical concerns and for any issues you're having with understanding the forum today. So if you can't see the interpreters, you need to use closed captioning, that's the place for that. If you have content related questions for us today, please pop those in the Q&A box, which is right next door to that one. And keep an eye on that box throughout the forum, as folks will be adding questions. If any of those questions pertain to you, or you definitely want to hear the answers to those, please feel free to upvote those questions in the Q&A box. I will collect those at the end of this forum during the Q&A section, and those will be the questions I use to ask Donald. Next, you'll notice that we have two wonderful interpreters joining us today. Their boxes are pinned to the screen here, but if you have any challenges seeing those boxes, please do let us know in the chat box that you're having difficulty, and we'll work behind the scenes to try to get that troubleshooted today. If you would like to use closed captioning, please take a look at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen in the black bar. There is a button there that says more with 3 dots. When you click that, you'll see that it says live transcription. If you click that, you should see those transcripts show up on your screen. You can click and drag them to move them anywhere throughout the screen as you need them. And you can resize them in the subtitle settings there. Please note that this forum is being recorded, so that means you'll see all the folks on the panelists, but as a participant, you will not be seen. The recording of this forum will be made available to you after the forum is over via a link using the email address that you used to register to this event today. So if you haven't registered, you won't get any fun emails from us post-forum. And with that, I am delighted to turn it over to Donald.
Thank you, Danielle. First and foremost, as I start every one of these, I want to thank the Columbus Foundation for investing the time and dollars and everything associated with making this happen. I saw somebody in the chat real quick thank them for creating accessibility through the interpreters. And I think that's awesome. Not awful, awesome. It's going to be difficult for the interpreters to deal with me. So please be patient with them. And again, I greatly appreciate that. One of the things that Danielle and I have been asking about and wanting everyone to do as much as possible is to complete the evaluations. Thank you for those that have great feedback, and we will continue to try and revamp and put presentations together that really bring you the most value. And then the last group that I want to thank are those repeat attendants. I think that I appreciate that. I appreciate you taking the time. We're trying to build a process here. Your feedback and your communication becomes valuable to us in that. So thank you all. I want you to know this topic, storytelling through financial statements, is probably one of the most difficult topics that I present. It's really asking me to put on a completely different hat, but I think it becomes invaluable to us all to understand how to put on this hat. So I want you to take big concepts out of this and not necessarily a detailed to-do list. We've got a lot of slides, and the reason I put a lot of slides together is so that you can take some information away in order to start to build your own story. So with that, we're going to get started, and I am super excited about presenting these topics to you. Okay. So we're going to go several places throughout today. First and foremost, you're going to meet me, and that's already been done. So I appreciate that. We're going to have a couple of quick stories about how accounting is an art, not a science. And I think that will hopefully free your minds a little bit. I have a tool that I'm going to share with you that some of my not-for-profit clients have found beneficial. We're going to talk a lot about storytelling and about how the stories get told. And then I'm actually going to show you a storytelling from DoorDash and how big companies do their storytelling so that you can copy and model after them. So here we go. Yeah. So accounting is an art, not a science. One thing that so many people that are non-accounting or non-financial folks want to really press into and struggle with is that there's a right and a wrong. And numbers are black and white, and we're taught that at a very young age. 2 + 2 = 4. Doesn't equal anything else. And there are some absolutes in the number area, but in accounting, it's really an art. It's not a science. For instance, there can be one topic that I have 7 different clients that do it all the same or do it all differently. So we get to the right answer. Their methods of doing it aren't the same. Okay, I see that people are having trouble seeing the slides. So let me pause and let's fix that technical difficulty. So can I get a couple comments in the chat to let me know whether or not we fix that? Okay, perfect. All right, good. I'm glad we hadn't covered anything real important in the slides yet. And I apologize, I've got 3 screens working in front of me and I'm trying to get used to that. So once again, accounting is an art, not a science. One of my professors in college said the biggest disservice that we do is that we give people in business a bachelor's of science, not a bachelor's of art. There's a story in it and there's an art form to it. And that's what I hope to kind of get across to you today as we go through this. We've talked before in our earlier sessions that there's really 3 sets of financial statements, especially in the not-for-profit world. There's a financial position, statement of activities, and a functional expense. There's a tool that I have used before for some of my clients, and I find it to be a very useful tool for clients and the boards. So I'm sharing this with you solely so that you can steal it. And what I've done on this chart is I've taken different concepts that you typically see in your financial statements. In that left-hand column, you'll see cash, accounts receivable, fixed assets, depreciation, and all that fun stuff. Those are the typical terminologies that you'll see in external financial statements. Then in that middle column, I've added what a accounting 101 definition would be. And then in that far right column, that becomes the most important column, because what I look for there is for the not-for-profit to put in their own words, what does that classification or that category mean to you, to them? So you can see that we've done this very vanilla, but one of the things that, for instance, in that second row, it says accounts receivable. One of the things that a nonprofit relationship might say is that this is the amount of money that's due from GCAC or due from the Columbus Foundation, so that everyone has a very good understanding of what truly that number translates to. So I think that this tool becomes very helpful and beneficial. And I've gone all the way through the financial statements. Now, if you say, Don, I don't understand that middle column, that accounting definition terminology. You know, we've had conversations through these forums about what do you need an accountant for? What do you need a bookkeeper for? If you have somebody doing financials, is there any value in having somebody on the outside with a higher level of expertise? Any accountant, especially that has a specialty in the not-for-profit space, should be able to sit down with you as an agency and put this together for you in just a couple of hours, so that the terminology starts to make sense to you and your organization, and so that you are already building a story around what the numbers say. The reason I like to use this is because I want you to see that there are very short stories or very short definitions that surround every number that exists. And I don't think that I will go through a whole bunch more on that, but I want you to know that, because as we build our story, the key to this is that as we build our story, we need to know what some of the words and mean to us as an organization. Because if I am a treatment facility and I have the exact same numbers as an after-school program, then my story is very different. We don't have the same story because the numbers mean different things to each organization. So this is where I really ask you to press in. And a lot of this, I'm asking you to press into defining and putting words around what you do before we get to the point of actually writing a story. Because if you've ever talked to someone that wrote a book, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of outlines, there's a lot of individual paragraphs written here and there before it's all pulled together to create a book or a story. So I'm trying to give you the pieces now to start to pull things together. And then at the end, we will write that story. One of the most important parts of any organization, not just of storytelling, but of any organization, is to determine what it is that you want someone to know. And how do you know you're achieving it? One of the things that we often ask our clients is, what are your key performance indicators? How do you know you're doing what you are intended to do? And so many times I get an answer like, hey, Don, it's all about cash in the bank. If I have cash in the bank, that means that we're performing well. If we're serving a meal, I know that we're doing well. And I'm not saying those are bad key performance indicators, but I want you to go deeper. I want you to go beyond. For instance, I'll give you an example. My staff will sometimes look at a cash balance this year and a cash balance last year, and they'll come to me and say, hey, Don, cash went up. Well, of course it did. I know that. Why did it go up? What's the story behind it going up? And should it have gone up? Those are the types of stories that we are looking for and the key performance indicators. So I wish that we had an interactive a little bit, and with 3 monitors, it's really difficult for me, but I'm going to pause, take a breath, and ask if anyone has a key performance indicator that they like to use for their organization. If you will just throw it in the chat so that other organizations can use it as a thought-provoking comment or a thought leadership. So I'm just going to pause for just 30 seconds and ask you to throw a couple of little things in the chat regarding what you might use as key performance indicators. Planet. Mm-hmm. Oh, who was that? That was really good. Kat, really good, really good. I like what you've got going on there. Good, good. So I like that. Thank you. And throughout, I'm going to close the chat so I don't get distracted. But throughout, just continue to help each other with that. Share that information back and forth. One of the things that I did is I went to donorbox.org. It's a website, obviously, an organization that helps to put things together for nonprofits. They listed 20 KPIs for not-for-profit organizations. So here's the different types of things that they would look for as far as KPIs, and you can tweak these and determine your own. We all start with donations and revenue, gift secured, donor. How about this? How about increase in the amount that the donor is giving? Wouldn't that be a great thing to measure? Fundraising return on investment. That is something that in your financial statement, a lot of huge donors are looking for. And then it becomes a question of how do you measure that? Website page views, emails open, and click-through rates. One of the things, if you are not familiar with an organization in Central Ohio called Mission Increase, they do some very good work regarding how to relate with your donors. And one of the things that they talk about through that is that email and newsletters, not only open rates, but click-throughs, and how can you adjust that? How can you do a better job? It's really hard. A couple of organizations I work with on a board level, we work very hard in our newsletters and not talking about ourselves. We want to talk about the outcomes and not talking about ourselves, because everyone knows that we're a great organization. I have a friend who says that, Don, I get a ton of mail, I get a ton of newsletters from a lot of people who are asking for either donations or participation or this or that. And he says there's one newsletter I read every month. And that newsletter that I read every month is from a real estate agent, because that real estate agent is not telling me that they're good at selling real estate. They're telling me how to get more value out of my home. So that becomes a really good indicator of, are you providing your readers with information that will make them better and make their lives better? So I really love that concept that Mission Increase has in there. So you can see that there's a lot of different KPIs, and this is where it really boils down to, as an organization, starting to look at what drives your success mechanism and how do you define success. You know, I saw, and I'll pick on my churches. I saw somebody from a church say, you know, tithes and offerings. Well, I would really like for you to press into that more. What drives the success of your church? Is it truly tithes and offerings, or is it the outreach that you do and the number of people that you serve? You obviously need tithes and offerings to do that stuff and to do those things, but tithes and offerings doesn't necessarily mean that you're changing the life of someone. And I would say the same thing to not-for-profit organizations. Donations in and of themselves don't mean that you're necessarily achieving your mission. So that's where the KPI becomes important. Now, Donald, why are you talking about KPIs? Why are you talking about this? Because when you tell your story, you want to tell your story regarding outcomes. And you have to determine what are the most important outcomes for us to measure. So that's how we're going to build the story. So now we've put some terminology around finances. Now we've thought a little bit about, okay, what really drives our outcomes, and are we able to articulate that to people? You'll hear a lot of people talk about value proposition. I believe that KPIs and being able to determine what drives your outcome either help, definitely enhances, and probably is the next step in a value proposition. Because most people look at value propositions as, you should donate to us because of X, and that's great. But now it's like, you should donate to us because we are, because of X, and here's our outcomes, and here's how we're able to measure those things. So I'm just pressing that in, because as we put these loose pieces of paper and these loose concepts together, we start to build on a story that we're able to tell. So I really am going to encourage you to think about the KPIs, think about the information that drives your business, so that you can start to frame the discussion that you want to have, not the discussion that someone else wants to have, but the discussion that you want to have. In the public sector, SEC companies, they do this exact same thing. It's called it's called an MD&A, a management discussion and analysis. So what I want to do here is I want to show you the elements of an MD&A. And I would be so excited for a not-for-profit to put in an annual report, or to put something someplace that is a brief MD&A, management discussion and analysis, because what it does, it takes those KPIs and it starts to frame a story. Stay with me as we put these loose pieces of paper together, because I'm going to take you to a MD&A for DoorDash in just a minute and just point out a couple of things in it. So just stay with me and follow along. The Journal of Accountancy said, here are the ideas and the concepts that you want to use in a MD&A, a management discussion and analysis. You want to use plain language, and you want to write in a brief overview. Stay away from your organizational jargon, because that gets lost, information gets lost. And I love this. Assume that your director is Rip Van Winkle and he just woke up at the end of the quarter. How'd it go? And then be able to answer that question very succinctly and compelling. Give top-down analysis. This is one of the things that I think that we as an industry need to get better at. We tend to go bottom up instead of going top down. And here's what I mean by top down. Top down would say, as it says in here, sales were up 8%, and then here's the whys behind it. One of the things that I look for at board meetings is that I like the financials to be put out before the executive director gives their report, because the financials force people to start at the very top level. And then as the executive director talks about what went on during the month, we get all the details that kind of support what I'm seeing at the top level. So that's just one of my perks, or one of my, I don't want to call it a pet peeve, one of my recommendations as we work through this on a real life example in board meetings. This is key. Pay attention to what your competitors and peers are disclosing. How often, and we don't like this, there's a lot of industry writing that takes place. We don't like to consider our friends in the arts, or our friends in treatment, or our friends in prevention to be competitors. So don't look at them as competitors. Look at them as what your peers are disclosing. And just in the chat real quick, people were shouting out and sharing some of the things that they use as KPIs. Use your peers to help you create your thought processes. So I think that becomes very important. How do you find out what your peers are disclosing? One way is that, and we talked about this, and we're going to talk about it more later regarding your 990, but have you ever looked at one of your peers' 990? Have you ever looked at one of your peers' annual reports? Lo and behold, have you ever looked at one of your peers' financial statements? So those are the types of things that I think will start to help build this out, so that we get where we need to be regarding just the MD&A and building this story. Don't be boilerplate, man. And you'll see, I'm going to show you, DoorDash actually just changed their whole format. They told everybody they were changing their format. Use charts. Charts are so much easier. And I'm going to, as we get to the end of this, I'm going to show you some charts that we do for some clients. I'm old, and I say that a lot. Back in the 80s, everyone was dashboards were all the rage. People loved dashboards. People wanted dashboards. There was dashboard software everywhere. Dashboards are making a comeback. Dashboards are making a comeback. You can believe me, and figure out how you can put your KPIs into chart form. And we'll show some of that as we work through this. The last point here was very interesting. Use your disclosure committee as a gateway. That's a very interesting concept to apply to the not-for-profit space, because we don't necessarily have a disclosure committee, right? We don't have committees that maybe do this, but maybe you can use your outside accountant, or maybe you can say, hey, auditor, could you look at this and let me know whether or not I've hit the high point? Use your resources to help you figure out whether or not your disclosures are, and when I say disclosures in this situation, I mean your stories are really getting at what you want to do. A broad, balanced perspective. This is where it becomes difficult for us sometimes to ask people that may be different than us and may disagree with us what they think about us. You know, I'm not sure. I know that we do it sometimes as a business. We don't do it all the time, not nearly often enough. I think that most not-for-profit organizations rely on a yes/no to a fund request to determine how their funder feels about them and thinks about them. I think that every now and then it would be great to have a real blunt conversation with a funder, even with a individual that receives services, to talk about, hey, how are we doing? What do you think? Those are just great business concepts that I think as we gather that back, those people and those conversations will even help us figure out how they're measuring us so that we can evaluate, is that really one of our key drivers or is it not? So that's where all of that information starts to come into play. Now, the next slide, I'm not going to take you all the way through it because it's a bunch of information. There's about 7 slides here. And why did I give you these slides? I gave you these slides so that you can see what a big company like DoorDash kind of does in their KPI. It's probably very difficult to read. It will be in your slides if you request them. But what I want, there's like 4 or 5 things I want to point out, and I hope that it shows up very well for you. I hope you see my cursor. Ashley, can you give me a nod if you can see my cursor on the screen? Okay. So DoorDash starts with their mission. That's phenomenal because as a not-for-profit, we should always have our mission, right? DoorDash simply starts with their mission. Then they come down and do their key financial matrices. These are their KPIs. So they've just rolled their KPIs into this. They did some charts. I'm not going to go through all the charts with you. I want you to notice this. They talk about what hurt them during the quarter. Extreme weather and financial stimulus. So it's not all, and as you read this, it's not all butterflies and rainbows. They're honest with their readers so that they get a real good idea of what happened, good and bad. The key is that right here at the bottom, they say this is by design. They let you know that this was the plan. They had a thoughtful plan and they just did not go as the wind was blowing them. Our strategy, once again, whether you be a church, an after-school program, we all have strategic plans, but can we condense, like, and this is DoorDash, and this is probably just one element of their entire strategic plan, but can we reduce the key elements of our strategic plan to 4 sentences to let somebody know this is our strategy, this is where we're going. We even do some forward thinking. What do we expect to happen in the future? How do we expect what we see on the horizon to affect our key performance indicators so that we know where we're going as an organization? And then they use the terminology as our investment approach. What I would ask my not-for-profit industry to do is to be able to describe our service approach, our approach to making our community better. What's our approach and how are we going to do it? So again, hopefully you hear some commonality between this and the KPIs and why those become important as you develop your story. I talk about some things they've done, and we're going to get through that. Okay, see where we're at. Okay. Some tools of storytelling. DoorDash had just a chart and some simple things. I'm going to show you right now. I'm going to try and drag this over, leave my presentation for just a second. And again, probably can't read it. And I know that. Don't worry about that. I want you to understand conceptually what we're doing here. So here's an organization, and dues revenue is really big for them. So church tithes and offering or contributions, really big for them. They report out where they're at in relation to their budget on a month-to-month basis so that they know what's going on. And what they've done is they've reduced their financial statements down to 7 charts. I can show you the charts. They don't mean very much to you, but we've been able to reduce their financial statements down to 7 charts so the board gets a real quick view. Are we on pace or are we not? So they've determined what their KPIs, their key performance indicators are in order to drive the business. And now they have 7 stories, 7 sentences that they're able to answer and look at to know where they're going. So DoorDash's story was, I don't know, 7 pages long. This organization's story might just be 7 paragraphs, 7 3-sentence paragraphs. And what I really want to get into is, this is where this becomes difficult for me as an accountant. I gave you these slides. I stole these slides from a grant writer that's a great friend of mine. One time she was doing a presentation and she talked about storytelling within the Form 990. And she talked about the different elements of a story that you have to have. And if you look at these elements, your favorite TV shows have these elements. Your favorite movies have these elements. And now what I'm asking you to do and imploring you to do is to, now that you have all these pieces, these loose pieces of paper floating around, pull them together to tell a story. The current situation, location, the current situation, the characters, who are you serving, who's funding you, who's involved in the process, the plot and the conflict, what's our needs, what do we need, where are we shortcoming, and then what are our great wins, the resolution, what's our plan. Remember, DoorDash talked about, hey, our strategy is, our plan is. What's the resolution to those conflicts? And then, man, we always end on a happy ending. Every show, every movie, except for a couple of long-standing television shows, ended with a happy ending. So where are you going and why are you so great? What's your value proposition? So I'm really asking you to take all of those elements, those charts, and try and mesh them to this. That's a big task. That is a big task and a big ask. However, once you do it once, the second, third, and fourth time you do it will become so much easier. Enlist the assistance of your board, enlist the assistance of the folks around you. Even people don't think about it a lot, but this is what grant writers do. And if you have a grant writer, enlist them also. Again, the process is, and it almost lays it out for us. I wish they had done this for me in school when I was writing a paper. You take each of the elements, you write a sentence or 2 about it, then you give it to someone else to evaluate your story and the messages and ask them, hey, when you read this, what are the key takeaways? And then evaluate that with what you were trying to communicate as far as the key takeaways. The hardest part is to enhance the level of writing with relationship words. I'm not a writer. I'm an accountant. Many of you are not writers. But this is where we really start to connect with our audience if we can use relationship words and put together the processes, take some very stale information, which are financial data and key performance indicators, and make them relational. go back, and if you take the time and you get the slides, go back and look through the DoorDash MD&A, and you can get anyone's MD&A. Just Google the business name of their MD&A, and you can find that. But go back and look at their story, and again, use what other people are doing to help you when you get stuck on words and things like that. The last thing I'm going to say about the storytelling, and we're going to talk about this later on with the Clemens Foundation when we get into the 990. This storytelling should bleed over into your Form 990. This is the part of the 990 where you talk about your different programs and your different activities. So you should be able to take all of this work and it starts to bleed into that Form 990, and it bleeds into the annual report. It's not just a one-off thing. I should be able to take someone's board minutes, if you will, and start to build their 990 disclosures and start to build their annual report. So I'm going to ask you to think about it not as a standalone process that I need to do one time, but as a process that builds on itself to get me a better outcome regarding my ability to relate and communicate with users of the information I'm putting out. So hopefully that made some sense. I'm sure there's hundreds and thousands of questions. In summary, get a great understanding of what your numbers mean to you, and not what they mean to an accountant, but what do they mean to your organization. Press into what drives the outcomes of your organization. We call those key performance indicators, and then be able to wrap those things around into a concise and compelling story, so that and a relational story, so that the users of that information really connect with your organization. Let's see. Next form will be so much easier to present, so much closer to my wheelhouse, because we'll be talking about board members and their legal and financial responsibilities. So that will be a fun one to be part of, one that I think that everyone needs, even if it's just a refresher, so that we don't lose sight of the requirements that exist. And finally, my contact information, and a big thank you once again to the Clemens Foundation and to everyone in attendance. Danielle, I'm sure there's 100 of questions, because this is a fun topic in conversation. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right, this is the time to put those questions in the Q&A box. I have a bunch listed here for you as well, but before we jump into the Q&A section, I want to highlight that, as I said in the beginning, this session is being recorded, and you will receive the link to that recording in an email after this is over. In addition to that, you'll also receive the slides that you saw today. Thank you, Donald, for putting so much good information right into those slides, because folks can reference those well after this forum has ended. We put in the chat, if you weren't able to register for this forum prior to the beginning of it, the registration period's been extended, so you can go ahead and go over there and put your email in there, register for this forum, and we'll have your email address so that we can send everything to you after the forum has concluded. So with that, I would like to just take a moment and kind of highlight the things that I heard that I thought was important about this, that what we were really talking about today, aside from, as you summarized, identifying what those key performance indicators are, we're also talking about how we collect, report, and present the data that really tells the work that we are doing, and tells the progress that we're making. And you highlighted that there's a quantitative element, a visual element, and a qualitative element to that storytelling. I wanted to take a few steps back as we have folks putting their questions in the chat box. For those of us who this is a new type of discussion, for those of us who they're coming to this forum and they haven't heard any of these terms before, can you talk a little bit about what is a value proposition? So just go back to that.
Sure. So that's a value proposition is in a very straightforward way of saying, why should someone be involved with your organization? What is it that you do that is worth my time, talent, and treasure?
Okay. So it's essentially the way that your organization brings value, brings benefit to the community or to the population of folks that you're serving. Thank you very much.
That's correct.
I've got here. So when you talked a lot about, what are the components of a management discussion and analysis? Can you talk a little bit more about, number one, the component, or not the components, but high level, what that is, and also who the audience for those documents might be?
So yes, and that's a really good question. The elements at the high level should be what you want someone to know in a snapshot, right? Without going through a lot of information. At the standard MD&A level, because the only people that are required to do MD&As are organizations that are traded publicly on the stock exchange. So they are doing their audience generally are their investors. And that's the reason I like to make the link between the publicly traded MD&A, because their audience are the investors. Well, when we make the link to the not-for-profit organizations, who are their investors? Their investors become their donors and their volunteers and other people that are putting their time, talent, and treasures into the organization. So I would say the investors in the broadest sense of the word become your audience. And as a not-for-profit organization, I don't necessarily know that you need to think about who are my investors, but think about who is it that is helping us? Who is it that is on our team? That becomes the audience for that type of a high level. Here's how we're doing. Here's how we're utilizing what you're bringing to the table for us. And this is why we value you so much. And I want you to feel good, because when you do this, outcomes are created. One of the things that I recently heard, and a great value proposition, they didn't quite go far enough into a discussion about it, but we all will hear, $25 a year or $25 a month can fund a business in Africa, right? A social enterprise in Africa can be funded on $25 a year. That sounds great. That sounds phenomenal. Now I want to know how many people are getting jobs, how many people are changing their lives, how many. That's the next element. It's great that $25 can do that, and it's great that you have the ability to get those dollars into action. But what I want to know now is how many people are changing their lives. I just recently heard about a organization in Denver that I'm getting ready to do some more research on. They come out with a report and a presentation. They have a transitional program, and at their graduation, they treat it like almost a high school, Danielle, where they say, hey, high schools will announce our kids were awarded this much money in scholarship, right? This program brings in all the employers from the community and says, hey, thank you. Our graduates are creating this much money in income. They're creating this much to the tax base. They're working at a livable wage. They are going beyond, hey, we had 48 of our 60 participants graduate from this program. They're really speaking into, here's how our community is changing because of those graduates.
That is helpful. Thank you for clarifying that and giving us all the detail on it. I want to quickly say two things to our audience today. If you have content related questions, can you please put them in the Q&A box? I'll be monitoring the Q&A box pretty closely to try to make sure we get to all those questions. I know some content related questions have made their way into the chat box, and I'll try to make sure I can grab those over to make sure that they are addressed here, but I won't be able to monitor that box as closely for questions. So if you've got a question, put it in the Q&A. The other thing I want to say is that unfortunately there aren't CPE certificates available for these forums. That wasn't something we were able to do this year, but it is something that's on our radar for 2023 and beyond, to make sure that as we offer forums like these, folks can get credit for them. All right, so we answered the question around who is the intended audience for the MD&A, and I want to ask a quick clarifying question for that. It sounds to me like what you might be saying there is that one place that would be good for it. So one obvious place is the board meeting, your board members, and making sure that they have access to that and understand at a glance what your performance is. Another good place, and correct me if I'm misspeaking here, might be an annual report or some sort of donor facing document that helps folks understand at a glance how your organization performed. Another good place for it might be in the financial documents portion of a website or something like that, where you're already putting your 990s or other things so the community then has access to it. Because really the audience, the way that I see this is the audience is anyone who may be an investor in your organization, whether that be through finances, or whether that be through time, whether that be through sharing your story with others. And so sharing it widely would be important. All right, so we have an answer to that one.
Danielle, the only other thing I will add to that is that in what I have found in the not-for-profit space, it's beneficial for you as the executive director, because I've never had a conversation with an executive director that could not tell me what was going on in their community and in their programs. They all know that. But what I'm looking for is when they verbalize that to me, and then I look at the story that the numbers are generating, is there a disconnect? So I don't need them to necessarily understand all of the details of the numbers, but when they tell themselves a story, I want them to be able to verify that, yes, this is consistent with what a forward-facing story would be also.
That's very helpful, because you're right. Being in the thick of the programming, you might lose sight of some of these, and that is a good way to make sure that doesn't happen. Quickly, can you share what is a disclosure committee?
Yeah, and again, we don't have those in the not-for-profit area. That would be a crazy thing to have. In the SEC being publicly traded stocks, so when you think about the big companies that are on stock markets, they will have an element of their board that is only responsible for financial disclosures that are made public. And that would be a separate committee of the board. Not-for-profit space, we don't have that. That's why you would need to rely on maybe a finance committee an auditor if you have one, and maybe a outsourced accountant that may be able to provide that resources or that expertise to you.
Thank you. The next question is, how often should your fiscal report be shared with your board? Monthly, quarterly, biannually?
I think doing that process monthly is a heavy lift. I really believe that doing that monthly is a heavy lift. I like the quarterly concept. I think that's beneficial to make sure that we're all on track. Semi-annual, I could get behind it, but no less frequently than that would be my recommendation.
I think you really addressed the second part of that question too. Is there a scaling of the level of reports they should receive? So maybe we do that simple dashboard report quarterly and a more in-depth biannual report once or twice a year.
Yeah, I would probably flip that a little bit.
Okay.
The dashboards I would do monthly. I think that that's a great snapshot to let us know if anything gets off track. And then I would love to see the narrative, if you will, on a quarterly basis.
So this leads into another topic and also the next question we have around those monthly dashboards and the things that you're putting on those. So there's the types of KPI that you choose should be actionable enough that putting something on there month to month is something that you can actually affect change on. So keeping an eye on that will be really important. So our next question is in that same vein around smaller organizations and calculating an ROI. So this is a big conversation in the nonprofit sector, not just for smaller organizations, but also for deeply complex problems that folks across multiple sectors haven't really been able to solve. So when we're talking about impact measures, because in our field, that's what an ROI, an impact measure. How do you easily calculate something like that? And this person says it makes sense for large scale prevention measures, but maybe not as much sense for small nonprofits or multi-layered problems. And how do you get at that? And I'll answer the second part of the question after you're done.
Okay, so it is a complex issue. And I had one client about 3 years ago that received funding from the city of Columbus. They work inside the school, and the city of Columbus wanted to know the ROI on their funding. And the organization like, Don, we have no idea how to measure it. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about your program. What's the key elements of your program from an outcome standpoint? Well, we want to increase graduation rate. Okay, great. Do we know that high school graduates earn a different amount of income than non-high school graduates? Oh, yes, of course. Okay, so we can start to use that outcome to say, we're generating X number of dollars of benefit so that we can get an ROI. Mm-hmm. We're generating $20,000 of additional income into our community based upon every $10,000 you give, something like that. It becomes a difficult issue. And that's why I start with the KPIs. Because Danielle, you said it, in the not-for-profit world, we're outcome measurement driven. We're not necessarily dollars and cents driven. So that's why I press into what are the key elements that you are showing to someone else that prove you're performing. And it could be in a school program, the number of people graduating versus what they were 5 years ago, or what they are at a similar high school that doesn't have your program, right? So it really boils down to those key things that you say drive your performance and prove that you are a worthy organization for our community.
I'll follow that up briefly to say that there's, that is exactly the way we think about it. We think about sort of one concept of proxy measures, what gets us close to the thing that you're trying to do. That's sort of a last ditch effort, but really we want to think about leading indicators. So, what behaviors do we know that are well documented drive this thing? And then what actions are we taking to affect those leading indicators? So that the basis of this question is about the exhaustive research that's required to come up with how we're doing ROIs. It really doesn't necessarily need to be like that. It needs to be thinking about how the logic behind what you're doing and how your organization is pulling specific levers to meet a certain outcome. The best example I have around this is the concept of sort of mitigating diabetes rates. And we know that diabetes takes years, number one, to develop and years to transition off of. So you're not going to have monthly actionable movement on a diabetes rate necessarily that you're reporting to your board, but you might have monthly action around the number of people who had access to testing strips and the number of people who, I can't even think of it, a report eating, more green leafy vegetables as opposed to something else.
Diet changes, attendance at workshops, because that outcome, there's 7 other things that we have to do before we can change that somebody's on or off a diabetic medication.
Mm-hmm.
So we really want to look at what are those 7 key things. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, Danielle.
No, that really put I think the nail on the head there, is that figuring out what those levers are, because the thing with the nonprofit sector is that, what the levers we're trying to pull, the change that we're trying to make in the community is usually long haul over multiple years. It's not something that you're going to see immediately. And so knowing exactly how you're affecting that change is really important to how you're telling your story. And how does the Columbus Foundation support this kind of work? Well, we do these for one thing. The other thing what we also do, if you take a look at our website, we have a whole nonprofit capacity building section on the website. This falls into that as well. Additionally, we partner with other organizations who are doing research that can help you get a little bit closer to what you're needing to do without doing it yourself. So take a look at your website, reach out to me if you have further questions about capacity building or about research that's happening in the community. I'd be happy to help you find that. But ultimately, what you're looking to do is reduce your burden by saying, what is it that we're doing and how is it affecting the community, the people that we're trying to serve? That's the thing you're trying to get at.
You use the word leading indicators. I use the word key performance indicators. Very similar. So whichever word works for the audience is the word that we want you to go away with.
Exactly. Okay, so the next question we have here is, how do you discuss deficient infrastructure to enable compliance with third-party funders and grants? So I'm going to try to do a little interpreting of this, and if
I think you should answer this question.
Okay, and if I misunderstood your question, can you please plop it again in the Q&A box? What I think you might be asking in as plain a language as I can manage is, how do you tell the people who are your funders that you don't have the capacity to collect the information that you want to collect for the requirements that they have? Number one of the things that I think is a sort of a big swing and a miss of philanthropy is the varying requirements of funders. So what we require might be different from what a government requirement might be different from what an individual donor might be. And until we can get our lives together, I'm really sorry about that, it'll be important for you to know what the audience is, the folks that you are requiring to report to. So, and then once you identify that, figuring out exactly what it is they want. So in our case, we, and I can only speak for the Columbus Foundation, I cannot speak for other funders. What we are looking for and what can help you with us is making sure that you understand that link, just like we talked about it before, between what it is that you're doing and how it has an end on the ultimate goal. Like, how are you supporting that ultimate goal, and being able to solidify the actions that you're taking and how it impacts that. The data collection for that can look a myriad of different ways. And that's, I think, the question that's being asked here is the capacity around data collection for some of these. And I actually had a discussion about a month ago with a room of nonprofits around all the different ways one can collect data. You can do hash marks in a notebook, you can do a shared drive, you can do Excel, you can do Google Sheets. Those are, you know, fairly accessible and in inexpensive ways. There are all sorts of reporting softwares that you could invest in if you had the resources to do so. But at the end of the day, and I used this example in this situation, without taking too much time, I apologize, but I'm thinking of it the way that the teachers at my children's Montessori school do it. They have a big fat notebook. They make observations of every student in the room all day long. And so when they come to our parent-teacher conferences, they have the big fat notebook full of paragraphs, but what you find is consistencies among those paragraphs that you can pull out. Those become quantitative data. So it gives you a lot of color, a lot of background, because you've made those observations in that way, but you can turn that into qualitative data, certainly. So I hope that answers that question. And if I totally messed it up, please feel free to put it back in the chat box and I'll do it again.
Danielle, one additional thing, if I can very quickly on that topic, is that whether you're a small organization or a large organization, you are adding value. Mm-hmm. So all that's being asked of you is to figure out what value you're adding, mm-hmm. and then to be able to prove that you're adding that value. So the tracking doesn't have to be 100 different things. It may only be one thing. So that's where you should really press into what is it that we're doing? Why do we exist? I've had some very difficult conversations with nonprofits in the last year, and the conversation is, if you went away, who cares? And I say things very harshly. Well, that all of a sudden put them on the defensive, and they say, well, they would care, and they would care. Great. That's exactly what we needed to know. Now, why would they care?
And so I want to highlight that there's two things happening here. There's reporting requirements for funders that just exist. And at the moment in time in which we are, that's a reality of what needs to happen. The other side of that is the reporting requirements that you should have for yourself to be able to know what your performance is. So it can be easy, as Donald said earlier in the call today, to get into the day-to-day work and not take a moment to step back and look at how the work is affecting our ultimate goal. And we want to design our measures and metrics around that. And sometimes that meshes with grant reporting and sometimes it doesn't. I hope sincerely that most of the time it does. But that's what you want to be looking at. And I know that it can be tempting to try to chase down what the funder is looking for in measurements and metrics, but it's important to use measurements and metrics for yourself, for your leadership and your management of your organization, and be able to use those to report out to your funders. We have another question. Donald, did you have anything to add, or I'll move on to the next question? Okay.
Have at it.
All right. Again, if you have additional questions like that, you can feel free to add them here to the chat box. You can email me if you have questions about funder reporting requirements. Happy to answer them. That could actually be another forum. Outside of our biased observations, how can we as staff members include participants and volunteers of our nonprofit into the compilation of storytelling equation to enhance the value proposition? So
Yeah.
do you understand the question, or shall I try rephrasing it
Oh,
for you?
I think what they're saying is, we believe we're awesome. How do we get a more balanced view of it? And that is really hard, because it forces us to ask people questions where they could disagree with us.
Mhm.
One of the things that I know that when I send out surveys to my clients, I like to send them to my best clients. Uh, why do I like to send them to my best clients? Because they tend to like me too. So it's just an exercise. The one thing that I will say, depending on the size of the organization, you can always get a third-party evaluator involved. I won't recommend that because that's very expensive. So you have to be a pretty large organization to do that. But I do say, go to your former board members, go to former employees, go to people that are no longer using your services. And I bet they will have a view that might be different than yours. Now, the truth is someplace in the middle. So that's where it becomes, how do we get that balance view?
The addition I will add to this is, if you understand the process that you use to deliver whatever service you provide to the community, looking at each step of that process and figuring out where are our pleased customers, where are our displeased customers, what might we have had people jump ship, and try to get at those folks to make sure that you have those voices reflected across the span of the service delivery that you're providing, so that you can get a well-rounded perspective. All right, next one is, how do you get leadership on board for storytelling instead of what they've been doing for years?
You send them to a forum. Um, um, really difficult because we're all creatures of habit. But I think what happens is that, and it becomes one or two voices that needing to speak up. With the dashboards that I showed you previously, I had a couple of board members communicate that they'd been on the board for 7 years, and it's the first time they understood financials.
Mhm.
So it just requires some people to speak up and to say, because now that leadership hopefully has other tools in their toolbox. They've only had one tool in their toolbox, so they have to use a hammer no matter what the task is. So as we give these leaders more tools, hopefully they will be responsive to what they're hearing because they now have more tools.
The other piece of that, if we're thinking about internal leadership, so, an executive team line who's having challenges with wanting to do the reporting this way, it could be a skill issue as well. So a person may not exactly know how to get from where they are to where you're asking them to be. And so that resistance that comes to bear in a way of resistance, as opposed to necessarily looking like a skill issue. So being mindful of that also. Our last question we have today is, what is a reasonable number of KPIs to have?
So I tell people this, and I'm going to go back to a pure accounting answer. People ask me, Don, how many chart of accounts, how many expense categories, how many categories do I need? And I tell them only the number that you will budget at. So only the number that you really are tracking at. So my answer to the question about how many KPIs are important, only the ones that you will hold yourself accountable to and work to move the needle. Because what you might find is that, okay, these are our KPIs, or these are our leading indicators, and we go about them and they're all performing well, but we don't feel like we're moving the bogey. We don't feel like we're accomplishing. Well, maybe we need to go back and look at those and take something off and put something on. So I don't believe in overwhelming people with information. I really don't. I don't believe that people will study and need 17 different types of data. So I try to stick them to, okay, what is it that you really will focus on? And then if we find out you have more capacity later, maybe we'll add something later. But what is it that you will really focus on?
That is helpful. Key performance indicators, leading and lagging indicators are a broad and complex topic. Thank you for taking it on today, Donald. It wasn't the entire breadth of what you talked about, but I think it is the part that folks have the most questions about and are most intimidated by. So thank you for taking that on. Hopefully we were able to take away a little bit of that intimidation around the topic. Like I said, that by itself could be an entire forum. So maybe it will be. I'll see if I can work something out like that. But thank you so much for joining us today. You have another forum, a finance forum coming up next month. We are delighted to have you back then. And with that, keep in mind, register for this forum if you haven't done that yet. That'll help make sure that you get the post-forum emails, the slides, the recording of the event, anything else that we happen to send out regarding this. And with that, have a
Danielle,
wonderful.
before we close, I don't know that you have publicly been recognized in this forum. I want everyone to know that as you look around and you see the leaders in the city of Columbus, Danielle has been recognized as one of the 40 under 40 by Business First, one of the people that are shaping our environment. And we are very fortunate that she's so committed to the not-for-profit industry. So I wanted to recognize you here for that and to say thank you, because I know that you're sticking your neck out in a lot of different ways.
Thank you. That is very kind. I appreciate that. And I'm excited to be here. There is nowhere else in the world that I'd rather be than in this sector. So I'll be here for a really long time.
Appreciate you.
Same here. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of the week.
Bye.